All right, welcome everyone this evening to this special meeting of the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny Panel. I think we'll just jump into things straight away. I know there's a lot to get through, and this meeting will be slightly different to the ones we've done previously. So if I can just jump straight in with apologies for this meeting. So I know we've had one from Jill Manley, and so Councillor Slavek Svinsky is here, and I believe.
Apologies from Anthony Fairclough and Victoria Wilson and Sam MacArthur and Clara Dressel-Sabi.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Fantastic. And everyone should have received the minutes from the last meeting. Are they agreed? Agreed? Right, fantastic. So just as we have a meeting also in 10 days' time, we're not going to be going through the performance monitoring or action log this meeting, just as we do have a lot to get through this evening. And so I'll move straight into the main topic of discussion today, which is looking at the options for the waste contracts as we move into the next couple of years. So just to frame the discussion, we're kind of taking this, looking at this. Well, first we'll be hearing from Natasha and our officers about how we got to this place and some of this things they took into account when they were making their recommendations, making their inquiries into what would be the best way forward. And then we'll take the discussion in sort of 3 phases. So one will be looking at the review as a whole, basically how it began. So looking at how the review is put together, the considerations and the choices put forward to scrutinize. We'll then be moving on to looking at how the council determined the best value solutions for these. So how the council carried out its analysis of the 4 options that are put before us and the metrics they used. And then we'll move on to the recommended service delivery models. So what the council recommended as the choice, as their preferred choice, and looking at the financial implications, the workforce and things like that. But just before, and then finally, sorry, we'll have an opportunity for recommendations from the panel. So we'll take that all in one go at the end. And just also to clear up something about what is exempt and isn't. I know there's papers circulated late last week. They included looking at the consultation. So just to be clear, so everything in the consultation is we can freely able to discuss. The only thing we're avoiding today is looking at specific figures and financial issues, particularly with many specific numbers. So if we could avoid discussion of that, but otherwise this consultation is free. Feel free to defer to that as you like. And just also just a technical note, depending on how long discussions go, we might have a break midway through, but we'll see how we go depending on timings. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Any questions at this point on anything that I've just said? No? And then if not, I might then hand over to Natasha, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for allowing me to come and speak to you for pre-decision scrutiny on this quite important decision. So just to take you, I'll speak very, very briefly because I know this is more about answering your questions and allowing you to scrutinise the recommendations that we put forward. But just to kind of recap, since we made the decision to end our current contract with Veolia in 2025, there's been 2 work streams that we've progressed. So firstly, we launched our resident consultation into the future of the services to get feedback about how people are feeling and maybe what we need to do next. And then we began to look at various options about how the future service would be delivered. So this paper just focuses on the delivery model, not the spec. That's the second phase of this, because once we decide what kind of delivery model we want, that's when we start looking at the detail of the specification and the contract. So the results of the resident survey highlighted that in the main, and I know saying this out loud means that I'll get, people will show me a million examples where I'm wrong, but in the main, our collections are in a good place, but 63% satisfaction rate with our collection service. That's our wheelie bins and our food waste collection service. And if we think about things like our recycling rate being the 7th highest in London, and the fact that we benefited from having resilience of a commercial partner through things like COVID and the driver shortage, you can see that actually this part of the service isn't broken. So why would you want to meddle too much with it? It's doing what we want it to do. However, when we look at the results for our street cleaning, we've only got a 30% satisfaction rate, and that's declined year on year since we outsourced. And when we issued our improvement notice to Veolia last year, a lot of that focus was on street cleaning and green sacks and the issues that we have with that. And what we kind of think that is about is the spec itself is quite baggy and very hard to say, you know, to pin down. And we have a lack of control over that part of the service. So when assessing all of these options, we genuinely went into this without having any preconceived notions about what we wanted to do. We didn't say this is an insourcing council, this is an outsourcing council, this is a council that only ever does arm's length. We didn't have any of those things. We genuinely wanted to find an option that works best for Merton. So we narrowed it down to 4 options of either insourcing, outsourcing, looking at a joint venture, or doing an arm's length company, which is where you kind of set up a company that's owned by the council but managed by a different entity. We then put it through a best value process, which isn't just about the finances, it's also about how we can implement something, whether it can be delivered, and it takes into account things like capacity and control. So we've landed on the recommendation to split the service, to contract out the collections, because we think that that would give us more resilience, that would allow us to use the technical know-how of the wider industry. It means we are able to be, because we don't necessarily have that capacity in the council just right now to bring that back in. So it means we rely on the kind of wider industry and the wider capacity there. But we want to bring in our street sweeping service because we think it will give us more control. We think that there isn't any benefit to outsourcing there in terms of cost, because actually it's cheaper to bring it back in. And it means that we can flex the service and make decisions around things about sweeping schedules and when things happen. So I think it's a balanced position that we've taken to try and utilize the technical know-how of the market, but also to be able to take the opportunity to take control of our street sweeping service, which is the most nuanced part of our waste services. And I'll go to officers to see if they want to add anything to that.
Thank you very much. I think the cabinet member has succinctly give a summary to the elements that we considered during the review, and we'd be more than happy to answer any further detailed questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So if we could then move on to the discussion. So this first section of looking at reviewing basically how this review was put together and some of the considerations in the choice of services put forward. So does anyone have any questions? And also looking at the consultation as well. So does anyone have any questions to add on that? Slavik?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I've got a question in terms of the transition. I'm assuming that with the ending of the contract, we'll have to be some of the staff or maybe all, and have a new staff in place as well. So will there be any transition period covering staff training between the end of the contract with Veolia and Merton taking over? Thank you.
The transition is a really important and big question. We've got about 18 months really to kind of get this right. So we are going to have to look at how we have a team looking at the transition and a team looking at BAU. The practicalities of that, though, I'd like to defer to the officers just so that they can give you a bit more detail on what that will look like. But it is something that is a risk to us because we need to make sure that we keep the improvements that we've made to our service on the road, but also look forward and make these developments for the next phase of this.
Thank you, Chair. It is a very interesting question, and since October, when we made a decision not to extend the contract, officers have been preparing and discussing with the service provider Veolia about this transitional period. So, and it entails many different parts. One being a very good and robust exit plan with Veolia, and we'll probably start that process probably 10 months, 12 to 10 months from the end date. And we'll have a succession of exit meetings and develop an exit plan to transition as smoothly as possible. We'll also have to, in any guise, whatever model we chose, or we do choose, we would have to set up a mobilization team of officers to do that, to enable that smooth mobilization. A lot of that happens in the background in terms of the service model itself with the frontline staff. That actually happens from Friday night transitioning to Monday morning. And it's a very quick and high-paced activity. What we would have for the initial, at least for the first few months of any new service provision, would be just a business as usual sort of arrangement as we transition over into the new service model and bring people on that journey. We would like to ensure that we have discussions with the staff up until that time, though, to hand over with that smooth transition in any service model. So we will be having a lot of detailed meetings in the background and ensuring that we have a long and robust transition period. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, Samantha.
There doesn't seem to be any assessment of sharing any of services with our SLWP partner boroughs. Was that given any consideration when you were looking at the different models?
Well, that was part of the initial decision at the beginning. So all the partners boroughs were advised to go their own way, to do their own thing and do the thing that works best for them. I think all 4 boroughs have learnt the lesson of having control of your service in your borough, because I know we are doing very similar things and there are certain benefits to economies of scale, but ultimately we've all got different streets and we've all got different needs, we've all got different flats above shops. So the decision from the South London Waste Partnership and the recommendation from the South West London Partnership was for us to separate and go our own way in the first instance.
Great, thank you. Also, yeah, Steve.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, does that preclude any future options, even maybe not as part of the South London Waste Partnership, but maybe bilateral ones with similar councils, even if it is just one, not the whole 4 other ones?
We're going our own way right now for this. I can't rule out anything in the future. I don't know what will happen after we've done this procurement exercise, but right now we are going it alone, as are all the other boroughs. It's not a kind of it's just we're all going our own way because we've all got our own needs. I think we've all learned that we have to do that. We have to build these contracts based on what we need them to do. But in a few years' time, I don't know how the future will lend to us and what benefits that will give us. We'll still be working together in terms of bulking and haulage. We'll still be working together in terms of those disposal contracts, because that does provide us with financial benefit to work together on those things, and we share kind of the sorting areas and things like that across the partnerships. That helps us bulk and haul our waste, and we'll still all be using the ERF as well. So we're still in it together on those things, but just on this delivery, this front line bit, we all recognise that we have to do what's right for our boroughs.
Great, Stephen.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a similar point, really. I'm not at all convinced that, given that we as a council recognise the benefits of combining our services in a number of different areas, that we just go our own separate way because we have a more sensitive service, which is more relevant to our area. We could say exactly the same thing on every other service where we collaborate, because of course it's much easier to respond to your local residents if you have all the control of the service locally. But typically we've decided not to go that way. We have for various services, we're doing them in collaboration with other boroughs because we're able to reduce overhead, because we're able to consolidate operations. And the idea that peculiarly here without really much explanation why we're saying, no, it's different here. I appreciate that we can get closer to what our residents really want, but there's normally a cost to that, and that's why we decided not to do it in other areas. Specifically, there's a question which I wondered about, was that for Formula 3 and Formula 4, in other words, one's a joint venture and one's a separately owned business. I wondered, could joint ventures be other councils, which has been asked already, but could joint ventures not be with other organisations? And so I would repeat the question that has already been asked.
I think it's a fair question, and it's definitely something we've considered. On the South London Waste Partnership, firstly, I think it would be wrong for us not to learn the lesson here. Where it does work for us to be in partnership, we're still in partnership. So that bulking, haulage, getting those economies of scale and working across those borders, we are still doing that because there's benefits to it. Where it's not working is where we're stopping, because that's not working. And on the JV and the arm's length, so in the report, I won't talk about the specific figures, but you'll see that it's cheaper, if we're talking about cost, to bring it in-house. That's the cheapest option, but we can't deliver it because we don't have the technical capacity in the council to do it. The most expensive option is to outsource because of profit margins and things like that. And when we do a JV, those things still are in play. When we do an arm's length, we have to set up a directorship and we have to set up a whole, like any business. So you're a business owner, you understand what that entails. So in a way, we're creating another level of bureaucracy and expense, when actually we could just do that part of the service ourselves and save the cost on it. So I completely understand your your drive to try and find where we can make those economies of scale and save money, but unfortunately in this combination it doesn't save money.
John.
Talking about money, there's a few questions I have around the cost, etc. So we were told, sorry, no, we were told when the contract model was introduced that it would be a saving of 2.5 million a year by doing so. Yet now there's no real discussion of estimated costs for the new services, especially with enhanced service specifications. So is the approach now not a savings measure? Is it just taking into consideration more the requirements of the service rather than cost? That in the report, paragraph 2.7 is actually incomplete and seems to be an anomaly between 2.6 and 2.7, where one says private sector can deliver at a lower cost, whereas 2.7 says that commissioned service will be more expensive. So I'm confused by the report a little bit. And the other one was when the decision was taken not to extend the contract with Veolia, because they proposed a significant increase in the cost. So what was the increased contract cost compared to the estimates of the 4 models that you went into?
So on the point about the tip in the report, it says typically outsourcing is cheaper for us because over 50% of our staff are currently still on Merton terms. It's not. So that's why it's not cheaper in this particular instance, unless we wanted to suddenly destroy terms and conditions, and I'm not prepared to do that. I don't think you would be either. So that's why that's not necessarily the cheapest option for us. And I don't think anyone's ever denied that the original kind of position was to try and save money. At the time, we were looking at austerity, or you have to find savings wherever you can, and it made sense at the time to try and save as much money as we possibly could by going into partnership and delivering the service as we have. Now, what we've got out of that is recycling that's actually working and saving us money. That is one of the brightest things that have come out of this, is that we've got a collection service that other councils are now moving towards. I was at an event over the weekend and someone was like, oh, we're going to start separating our tins from our cardboard? And I was like, well, we already do that. It's okay. And our food waste recycling is a big win. So we won that battle in terms of collections. Where it hasn't worked and where those savings have had had a negative impact on the service is on street sweeping, because it's more about boots on the ground, and it's more intensive. It's more about labour and it's less about machinery. What were your other questions? Sorry, what was the last one?
It's just comparing the increased cost that Veolia were proposing, which is why we went against them, against the estimates from the 4 models.
So the 4 models are based on BAU, so that we could compare it to that. So that's without us doing any, so we could compare apples with apples rather than what would enhanced service would look like. Was it a 30% increase, Veolia was saying? I'll double check with the officers. I think it was a 30% increase, just to stand still, not to improve anything to extend the current contract. Now, we have compared BAU across these models so that we can see if we did nothing, but we had to do something else, we had to do a different model, it would mean that we'd be able to understand what that looks like. The second phase of this is where the costs may go up because we want to do different things with the spec, or we want to put more resource into certain areas. But that's the second part of this process.
Do officers want to add anything to?
Sorry, I've been asked what BAU means, business as usual. Sorry. I've been hanging around with the officers far too long.
Cool. Do any officers want to add anything to that? Or are you okay?
I think conceptually, in terms of the business, and Councillor Mercer raises a good point about, working together and many different things. It's a very intricate business, and as Councillor Irons was detailing, the way we currently work within the South London Waste Partnership, if you think of it like a county council in the district council, the county council functions where you have the disposal activities and the larger volume issues in terms of in processing. That works really well. Collectively together, us, the 4 authorities, we have a really good pool of those materials. It gives us a big market share where we can draw efficiencies in the marketplace. If you think from a district council perspective, where you do the localized services, such as the collections and the street cleansing operations, what's really volatile within that is the resources. So if you're joined with another partnering authority, for example, and a couple drivers go on holiday and you don't have enough drivers and a couple vehicles are broken down, all of a sudden you could be potentially impacting thousands of residents. The impact is, an average collection round is about 1,250 properties. If that vehicle didn't go out and you didn't have enough resource to back that vehicle up, that's a sizable impact to your community. And that's day in, day out, because of the nature of this being always on. And that's another reason why the joint venture or LATCO model, they don't seem to be as productive in this model, because it isn't about going out and finding additional commercial activity to lower your base revenue costs, because your resource profile is always maximized, always utilized. They're working very efficiently all the time. You have a very slimmed down model. Any increase in business requires a large investment in fleet vehicles and personnel so you don't take away from the baseline business. So that's a large investment. And soon you would find yourself not actually in that model, you'd find yourself almost in the private sector model if you were getting larger business. So that's why it's not advantageous to necessarily go down the LATCO or joint venture model. And we have done a lot of interviews with local authorities that have been in those relationships to try to understand their arm's length company. And, they're not to be named in probably a public event, but I don't think that the responses from officers that we've interviewed, they weren't, I would say, optimistic or positive about that. And it wasn't a panacea that was fixing the localized issues. Hence why these localized services are so critical to get right at this stage, to make sure we have the technical skill to do it, but we also have the resource provision to keep that always on model. It's almost like a utility. People expect it to be delivered all the time with that consistency. And hence we put a lot of that rigor into the model when we did our assessments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, obviously this will be split into two parts. You've got one part in-house and one part outsourced. So with the outsourced part, I just wanted to know, what sort of length are you envisaging
Sorry, can I just, that sounds like maybe that's something we might discuss in the third section on the specifics of the recommendations
Oh,
therein. So
right,
I think
okay.
more just kind of looking at some of the review right now and the choices before us and some of the considerations when we started this. If that's okay, if we come back to that, is that okay? Well, yeah.
The last time this came up for review about 7 or 8 years ago, there was some soft market testing done and discussions with various providers. Have you had a chance to do that this time round, and what was their broad feedback if you did so?
I'll go to the officers to answer that. Obviously, I wouldn't have been in those conversations myself. I think though it's a good time to highlight that yes, if the market isn't interested, then we'll have to review what we want to do. That's out of all of these models, every single one of them comes with some kind of risk, and for this one, it's making sure that the market's interested in delivering this for us. So I'll go to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. And Chair, we did soft market testing with officers and through other officers within the South London Waste Partnership. They were invited to soft market open days, where we interviewed 4 of the primary larger providers across the UK and even the world in respect to waste management solutions. I would always caveat a soft market testing day is a day for them to also show their wares. So it's quite a positive thing, and it's a can-do sort of day because they potentially would want the attraction of that business. We asked a load of detailed questions in regards to the current state of the business, what the potential would be for example, environmental solutions on decarbonization of fleet. But we also asked technical questions in respect to the models that we were looking at. So disaggregating waste and recycling services from street cleansing services for that point, are they still viable if they were separate, and which they've confirmed that they're viable commercial models. So we did a full range of soft market testing with those providers. Let's see if Mr. Baker would like to add anything.
Just thanks very much, John. Just to add, yes, certainly as officers, as part of the partnership, those were very robust sessions with the market providers. Certainly the overwhelming feedback, particularly around waste collection, that as a standalone service, this is certainly a Merton-sized operation would be of interest to the open market. So we're confident that by taking away the street cleansing function, what's left is still a sizable commercial opportunity for the market to tender and create that competitive dialogue that we so desperately need to drive down those prices, albeit that the financial costs won't be the main driver here. Obviously, it will be a significant consideration, but also the quality of services. The external market can bring the quality that we so desire, along with the financial implications that go with it. But for a waste collection service only, there is a market appetite.
Great, thank you very much. Is it still on the review section? Yeah, great.
Sorry, hi. Picking up what you said about the 30% Veolia increase, and in 5.6, there's an estimated 25.8% cost increase. Is that on the base now or the base after the Veolia increase?
Sorry, you say 5.6?
Yes.
So let me just double check which one it is, but I think I know the answer. Oh no, so this is just our current costs.
So
this is just current. So if we were to do nothing, it would still cost us more money, basically.
Right.
No matter what happens, that's due to inflation, due to other pressures in the market, not making as much money from the recycling market and that sort of thing. So whatever would happen, this would need some growth.
Okay, so it's not above the Veolia as it is now.
Yeah, it's our BAU, as our business as usual.
Okay.
Having received the consultation papers about Friday, I think, managed to get through most of them this weekend. I'm just surprised how little the public consultation response is referred to in the main report. So, could you highlight an area where the administration's proposals have been changed by the response to the consultation?
I firstly apologise for you getting them late. That was not, you should have got them when the paper went out, and it was just an administrative error. So I apologise for that. But I think the whole approach has been shaped by what's in the paper is the kind of the two standout metrics, i.e. are you happy with street cleaning? No. Are you happy with the bin collections? Yes. That helps us to really shape our approach to this. It's highlighted, what's been the sore points. It's backed up just the kind of member inquiries and complaints that we've received. So I think it has entirely shaped our approach. As I said, we went into this not with any preconceived notion of what we wanted to do. And so once we got those results back, it really did help kind of sharpen, right, well, if we want to control the street cleaning, if we want to be able to do that, what is the mechanism that we need? What's the delivery model that we need? And given that we weren't saving a massive amount of money by outsourcing, it just made sense to then take that bit back, and it's the bit that we can deliver, and it doesn't take us having to do a lot of heavy lifting. And there's also things around flats above shops and stuff we've already discussed at this panel, but it did really we did some specific analysis on those residents, and it's definitely galvanized our efforts to improve that service, and that's something that we're about to do very soon, to change the collection frequency of that service for those residents. So I think it really has shaped everything.
Great, thank you. Any final questions on the review section? Yeah.
Right, I have got one more. Given that a lot of it is going to come down to enhanced specifications, but those weren't included in the best value modelling, are you concerned at all that when you decide on a model, if the enhancements haven't been taken into consideration before that might change what the outcome would be? So you're looking at things in an abstract, but you're not looking at the enhancements that you're going to bring in later in the best value modelling. Do you see what I'm saying? So the enhancements.
I think I understand what you're saying. So because we haven't done the spec exercise yet, will that change what the best value would be? I'd say I don't think that's a risk to us, because the only way we could firstly do the exercise to work out is the best model, so we're comparing like for like, is to do the approach that we had, which was take BA business as usual and compare that against the different models. So once we start doing the spec, that would be on top of a higher base cost and a higher base effort, regardless of whichever one. If we picked, say, outsourcing, for example, we would just be ratcheting up the cost on that. And so that's why I don't think we're starting at a certain foundation and we're building on that. So depending on what foundation we decide to build on, I don't think it would be massively bad.
And I understand that, but is it not possible that one of the ones you projected might actually come in cheaper if you take the enhancements into consideration, depending on what the enhancements are? Is that not possible?
I don't think it would be possible, because as I said before, one of the reasons that it's not necessarily cheaper for us to outsource is because our half of our workforce that have outsourced are already on Merton terms and conditions. The bit that we want to, and our bin collections are okay. So actually the spec for the bins, we might do some tweaking around it, because nothing is perfect and there might be some things we want to do better. But actually it's quite solid. Where we need to add the spec, where we need to really get into it, is the bit we're bringing it back in-house. If we did that in the private sector, that's where the price then ratchets up. Do you see what I mean? Because then bringing it back in, we have more flexibility, we have more control. We can decide kind of who's responsible for what, and we can put the flex into the service as we see. But if we were to go out to market and say, do this, this, and this, of course you can, but it would cost you more money.
Right, thank you. Well, I think that question brought us on to the best value solutions and how they were determined. So looking at, sort of this part, kind of looking at how the council carried out its analysis of the options that were put forward, the metrics it chose, the options, and how it ranked those services that are in that report. So any more questions on the metrics used, on the services ranking, things like that? And if there's none, then Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. I think my question was essentially whether they could and should be divided as much as they have been. I mean, what occurred to me at a very simplistic level, and without having yet gone along with a rubbish collection lorry or with street sweepers, which I'm sure would help me, was that it seemed to me to be self-evident, based on no knowledge, but seemed to me to be self-evident that if someone conducted street sweeping after there had been waste lorries going around collecting, that might easily join one with the other and save cost, as compared with the two of them being completely separate operations. And so therefore I did wonder whether we mightn't at least consider whether there was still savings to be had if we gave people the opportunity to do street cleansing as an add-on to their waste collection services.
I think there's definitely something in having a backup plan, but I don't think it will be based on cost, because the costs would be more expensive to outsource. So if you go through the paper, we don't talk about specific figures because of commercial confidentiality, but outsourcing would be the most expensive option. So if we to ask people to make that bid, I think it would be if we suddenly got down the road and realized we couldn't deliver an in-house service, to have that costed in the back of our minds, I think is helpful. But I don't think that having a backup plan is to save money, because, as I said, because our terms are good, it wouldn't necessarily save us money. And when you have to then add in the profit margin, it doesn't save us money. It's like, from what I understand, the recycling market isn't what it used to be, and that's how these companies used to be able to make money. And it's not that anymore. We're living in a different world than we are 8 years ago, so we have to react to what's happening now.
So I noticed the value metrics that you have. One of them is reputational impact. Was that considered as one of the main impacts, given how the first couple of years of the previous one was particularly bad? Would you say that was one of your highest weightings, or would it be purely financial, or one of the other metrics?
I don't remember the specific weighting, so maybe an officer can tell me specific. You can see it's 2.5. Of course, it's a concern, because I mean, you've got an inbox, I've got an inbox, everybody in this room has an inbox that's full of complaints. And as a council that's got a focus and an ambition to build on civic pride in this borough, that starts on our streets. So of course, reputational impact is something that needed to be considered. So that's the good thing about a best value model, is that you're not just looking at, okay, what's cheapest. You're looking at what will help us deliver on our priorities. And my priority is to deliver a waste service that keeps Merton clean, but also tackles the environmental challenges that we have and that responds to what our residents need. So yeah, reputational considerations, of course, are important, and that's why they're factored into the model.
Do any officers want to comment, John?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the totality of the reputational impact is in table 1 in the subsequent tables underneath of that, where you'll see that the weighting for reputational impact is at 12% as compared to 17.5% for financing or for the deliverability of the service model, which is 15%. So we have weighted those in terms of the impacts on the service as well in totality. So reputational impact definitely has an impact on the service, both on how we deploy resources, where we deploy resources. So the risks associated to negative reputational impact has an impact on the service as a whole. So we've tried to look at these 13 indicators from a whole service impact in order to determine the recommendations within this report. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Martin.
Obviously, the service model is the biggest weighting in this. What other councils have had a separate street cleaning contract and a waste contract? Is there many examples of this in London, obviously learning from best practice?
I think I'm going to have to go to officers to answer that specifically, but we have avoided, there's one council that has been quoted a lot during this, but I won't name them. One council that had various different contractors doing various bits of work, and that didn't work. They had, I think, they also had at one point 4 different arm's length companies working together, and that turned into a bit of a bun fight on the streets. So we've avoided having various contractors compete for different bits of work so that we don't end up having to deal with any kind of contractual problems between various contractors, because that would be a bit of a mess.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. And I think the particulars of that isn't necessarily a DSO option versus a commissioned out or service provider led option. It's about the disaggregation of the two services, you know, and do they effectively work? And there's many places across London. I think Wandsworth, our neighbor to the north, has 2 different service providers. Richmond has 2 different service providers. So this is a replicable thing which has been done industry wide in terms of not having street cleansing totally linked with waste collection and recycling services. And I think the future is also something that we're considering, and you have that in the metrics in terms of the adaptability of the service model, and you also have model opportunity, because where we are with the climate change emergency, what the future looks like in terms of, you know, we talk about recycling percentage, but we should be transitioning to low carbon solutions. What does your waste service look like, and how are your residents performing from a carbon perspective, not just a recycling target value? Our industry will be adapting rapidly in that area, or should be, to address the climate change emergency, whereas street cleansing won't adapt in that function. So there's one is going in a certain direction and the other will have its primary function in there. So looking at those 2 models, I think there is some replicatable models across London where that has worked. Thank you.
Follow up on the deliverability on the mobilisation service model for the direct service option. It seems to be significantly higher than the others. How can you be so sure of that?
Sorry, so which was that again? Which was that again?
On the direct service operations one,
Table 2.
Table 2, the deliverability for mobilisation and service model seems to be, you know, much higher than the other models. So how can we be quite sure that we can actually deliver that, given past performance?
I suppose because we control it. Once that's in our gift to decide how we mobilise. I think though, by mobilising one part of the service, not both, so we're mobilising the bit that isn't about the heavy equipment and isn't about the workshop, it's about the boots on the ground. By focusing on mobilising that and getting that right, that's why we think we can do it. I would have concerns if we just brought everything back in and over the next 18 months suddenly had to try and buy all the vans and sort of the workshop and do that. So this kind of hybrid that we've landed on is taking control of the street cleaning because we think we can deliver it, because it's not about the technical know-how, it's just about mobilizing the resource, and the bit that we need technical support with, the bit that's the heavy lifting, the bit that would be helpful to have a wider industry knowledge, we're hoping to have support from the private sector. So that's why I think we can deliver on it.
Following up on the question about the weightings, etc., is it right that the weightings were the same for both waste and recycling and for street cleaning? Because I believe the requirement was for greater adaptability on the street cleaning side as one of the key drivers. So I'm just wondering whether the weightings should be the same for both in the analysis.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, there would be a certain, I guess in theory, there's a certain amount of adaptability when it's your own service, because you don't have to go back to the contractor and say, can you change this in the contract to do what we want you to do? So I suppose that's what the model's picking up on. But I think, we're going back to my earlier point, in terms of what we can actually deliver and in terms of what we can manage as a council, focusing on street cleaning, that's the bit that we need to be more adaptable, because as the officers have said, stuff that's going to come out of the environment bill, we don't quite know what the service might be. We're going to need to have support from the industry around what kind of producer responsibility and around what that does to our recycling rates, where people are told to go and recycle things. But where we need, so working with a contractor on that and having those resources is really helpful. But having maximum flexibility for our street cleaning to sweep streets after there's been collections, not before, to go out after events, and to not have that be something that's an additional service but part of the core service, that's what makes it more adaptable.
And I understand that, but what I was saying is that if the adaptability of the street cleaning is the most important factor, shouldn't the weighting in the analysis be higher?
I don't know if an officer wants to suggest why it's not.
Thank you very much. I think there is a widespread in terms of the weightings associated with it. For example, the adaptability before that is the deliverability, and that's, I mean, if you look at the combined weighting for the deliverability, it's actually quite high, because one, which is the mobilization period, which is the initial 12 to 18 months from post April 2025. So that's quite an extensive period, but we have to get it right during that time. That's why there is a significant weighting to that, as well as the future deliverability of that successive model. The adaptability in what we do, we need to be responsive, but we only have certain financial envelopes to be responsive. There isn't going to be radical shifts in terms of the adaptability of these models. They need to be adaptable, and hence why you have a lower weighting. The deliverability is much more key, because the majority of the functions that we undertake are statutory functions, and they have a regularity to those functions. We definitely, and in terms of the adaptability and the ability for our model to address those, the importance is having that flexibility. I think we have evaluated those equally, rightly so, because both of those models are equally important to adapt at certain times. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, John. Steve.
Sorry, can I just support my colleague's question? It seems to me that we've arrived somewhere, perhaps as a result of this assessment so far, but we're saying there's different considerations apply to the two parts of the service. There's a different direction of travel in terms of, for example, the environment and sustainability we need to think about for waste, and there's different issues for street cleaning. So that's why we're thinking about approaching them completely differently in terms of the way that we contract them. And yet the weighting we've got on considering them is exactly the same. It's very difficult to say these are different sorts of services and we're going to approach them differently and yet at the same time say the same weighting should apply to both of them. Surely they're either very similar or they're quite different, in which case, if they're quite different, they should have different weighting on what's important about them.
Dasha, do you want to come out? Or John, do you know?
I think you're right that in one way, but in one way, they are quite similar. They're nuanced. 90% of the resources, labor and vehicles for both models. The replicatable nature of what they need to do is the same for both models. The need for having workshops to control vehicles, fuel usage of vehicles are very similar for both models. What changes is in terms of the waste and recycling services is more led by national government and the responsiveness that we need to be to the industry and legislation. And then also the additional part of that is then connecting what you've picked up, so either waste or recycling, within disposal technologies to manage that. That's a bit nuanced as compared to street cleansing services, where it's more about a general collection and cleanliness of our neighborhoods and communities. And that's where it's a bit different. It becomes a bit more nuanced. How do we react to local fly tipping incidents? How do we respond to residential roads versus high streets or transport interchanges? Those are the nuanced bits within it. And those are the adaptability measures that we as technical officers measured against in terms of that. So they are the same, but they are nuanced differently. And I think that is it's an interesting point you raised, but I don't think it should change the model radically. Thank you.
Sorry, and just also you compare it to the commissioned one. So if you go to the commissioned one, it's a very similar mod. It does the same thing, but so the same kind of similarity is the same kind of deliverability and flexibility. It's the same thing in that model, but it comes out lower because it's a different way of doing it. So we're not comparing them with each other. So that you're not comparing insourcing with insourcing. You're comparing insourcing against commissioning out to see what's the best thing. So perhaps I hope that makes more sense. If you go back and compare it to the commission service, you can see where it suddenly becomes a bit more difficult, and that's why those are the things that are different. Do you see what I mean?
Charlie, do you want to come?
Charlie.
I was just going to add, I think they're very valid points in terms of the design and the weightings applied within the matrix. I think from an officer's perspective, we didn't want to preempt the outcome of each of the delivery models for each of those services. So we wanted a generic one-size-fits-all matrix that would compare like for like, apples for apples, and the outcome was the outcome. We didn't want to preempt even, the resident survey outcome and then adapt a model that addressed one element of the feedback. We wanted a straightforward, open and transparent matrix, and the outcome was the outcome. And then now, obviously, does that support and enhance and underpin the foundation work that was done through the residents consultation? Yes, it does. But it was important as officers that we compared both services against the same set of criteria, against the same weightings.
If I may, I think that's entirely right. But that's the reason why you've got the same questions asked against every single model. Yeah. But the question is not whether you ask the same questions on every single model. The question is whether for different parts of the service, in other words, street cleansing as opposed to waste, you should have different priorities. So, for example, if adaptability, as my colleague said, if adaptability is the most important issue, it should be, for example, a weighting of 20% for street cleansing, and then you go through all the different service options equally so that you're comparing them with the same standard, but you don't apply 20% to the waste because that's not, adaptability is not the issue. So what I'm saying is, I think it's a very good point has been made, is that if there's different factors which we need to prioritize with the two different services, we should be considering different weighting, that's all.
Natasha, can bring you in?
No, and I agree, but you have to, when you're looking at the columns, you're comparing the same service with the same service. So the deliverability and of an in-house service in theory is easier because we control it. But then when you compare that with a commissioned service, you compare that with the commission service, you'll see that the mobilization and deliverability there is higher because we can on that half of the service, because you can see that we can rely on those expertise. So perhaps the way it's laid out isn't helpful because we're not comparing the same model with the same model. You've got to compare them against each other, and that's how it works out.
Great. John, we want to come in there, or you?
No, I think Councillor Aaron's covered it, and going back to the point Councillor Holden raised in terms of the delivery model, it was interesting that yes, the in-house model had scored higher in terms of the deliverability. However, it scored lower in terms of the initial deliverability during the mobilization phase, because that would be more complex to set up than just going into a commission service. Commission service scored higher during that phase because we were measuring the 4 different models against those service lines for that service category. And that is how you evaluated those scorings because we were looking at not at one service model with all that criteria, but each criteria against the 4 different service models was the scoring. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Are there any final questions on how the council determined the best value solutions? And if not, cheeky one. Okay, one last cheeky one.
Cheeky one. What consideration was given to the volume of member inquiries received over the years in terms of how you chose the different options here?
Well, I mean, that's why reputation is in the model, as you said earlier on. That is what that's what covers that. The fact, and as I said in my answer to that original question, I have an inbox, you have an inbox. We've all been at the coalface of what's happened here, and that's why it was part of the scoring.
Great, thanks, Tasha. So then I might now move us on to the discussion of the council's recommended service delivery models. And I know that Caroline had a question earlier, so on that topic. So if I could bring you in first, Caroline.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, most of us on this committee, we're all new councillors in our first term, apart from 3 of you. So this is a really exciting project for us because it's probably the first thing that we're going to be in right from the very start, from the word go. So we're going to be able to monitor and track it all the way through from the start. So what I would like to know is, with the outsourced part of it, how long you envisage the initial contract being, and for the in-source part of it, how long do you envisage before you actually monitor or review that to see how well that's working? Thank you.
I think in the report it says we'll be looking to go for an 8-year contract, because I think we have to provide certainty to any provider. I think we'd still have a 4-year break clause, just as we have with this current provider. I know that we've had issues around the current terms, but I think going into this with the lessons that we've learned and trying to provide certainty to any provider that comes on board, I think is a fair request from to the market. In terms of the in-house service, well, we're getting to build this from the ground up. So as far as I'm concerned, we monitor from day one, and I think that having the input of members into what goes into that monitoring and what comes out of it would be really helpful, because it will be coming to this panel, it will be coming to the people here, and we've all tried to make head and tail of the metrics that are in the current provision, and I think we'd just like to be happy for people to be completely clear on what's expected. So yeah, from day one for the in-house service, I would expect us to have some robust monitoring in place.
John?
Thank you very much, and that's correct. And I think the purpose with the waste and recycling services is it's a huge capital investment in vehicles and fleet, and the write-off period for those. So the operational period typically of those vehicles is around the 8-year mark. We also have to be very mindful of the decarbonization that needs to be supported through that, and who is best placed to do that. You know, the electrification or other technologies in terms of the decarbonization. It's a huge expensive investment, and a very important one to make sure that we transition during that period, and we need that technical input and expertise as well. In terms of the in-house model, and we've discussed this with the cabinet member through this development, you know, we've put a lot of priority in ensuring that we have, pardon me, an effective client team to manage both a commission service as well as an in-house model. It's to ensure that we have a robust client team, and it doesn't just assume itself as that they're one of the family and they can, you know, we can be lackadaisical with those outturns. We will definitely have a robust client team to manage those outputs that are coming from even the in-house model to make sure that we're getting that service delivery. We'll be writing a specification, so it won't just be, you know, just kind of an open book to just kind of go out and clean things. We'll have detailed specifications as if we had a service provider to make sure our in-house model is delivering on the things that need to be delivered day in, day out. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Any question?
How will the two streams working together be monitored if you have one in-house and one outsourced? And because both services obviously link together, for instance, street sweeping after bin collections, and how are you going to, deliver quality control, and how are you going to review it?
I think just as we just said previously, the ambition would be to have the same robust metrics for both parts of the service. But I would like members' input into what those metrics are, so that we can, so that we're transparent and we know that. I'd like us to be transparent about what's required from each side of the service to you know, to the maximum that we can without breaching commercial confidentiality, of course. But as what we would do is to have robust client monitoring and the same set of standards for both sides of the service. So it isn't that sort of, oh, well, it's in source, but it doesn't matter. It does matter because there's nowhere to hide. It's our service. It's got our name on it and it needs to work. So yeah, we need a good, strong client management team. We're not, you know, when we first outsourced, we outsourced that part of the service too, the monitoring. We have brought that back in. We're doing that bit now. So we've got a really good setup for our client team, which is based on data, and I see a dashboard once a week that looks at the inspections that are going on the streets. So it's just about building on those things that we've already got, and making them even more robust, and making sure that we're all comfortable with how that inspection regime goes on.
Talking about that, is there, could you just enlighten us as to the process of putting that specification together for both services and how we're going to be involved in future?
So the spec is part 2. So once we know what we're doing and we know what we're looking at what model we've agreed on, the spec is part 2. We're going through line by line what could be added into the service and looking at the costs of that. I would welcome the opportunity for members to input into that when we've got the kind of financial envelope about what we can afford, looking at what we're kind of looking to prioritize. I'd love to get your thoughts on that and happy to bring that back here for further investigation. So yeah, the process is we're going line by line through what would go into a new spec, and looking at how that would impact the cost, because obviously we don't have a blank check. We do have to try and keep it within certain margins of affordability. Otherwise poor Roger's going to have a heart attack. So we have to do that, and then I'd be more than happy to share in that decision-making process here, given, as I said, you'll be the panel that will be scrutinising this in the future.
Great, thank you. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. So first, very quick one. I think Councillor Hines is saying that if, for example, we want to talk about exactly what waste might be collected, that would be the subject matter of a subsequent discussion.
Yeah, when you say what waste, do you mean what waste streams? So you think about anything in particular?
I'm thinking about soft plastics and when I might discuss that with you.
I mean, I'm happy to discuss it now, because the answer to that, and very good question, and everybody wants to get rid of their soft plastics, is that the government's environment bill is still going through at the moment, and we don't know how much of the producer responsibility stuff is going to impact on what we collect. We can't make an investment in that at the moment, because we just don't know if we're going to have to, because it might be that the producer will have to pay for it. So I think it would be wise for us to understand the outcomes of that legislation, how we respond to it, before we make any kind of, I'm going to start giving everyone extra wheelie bins that we can take away. It would be a significant investment for us to take that waste stream, because we can't just send it to the other places that we have. You'd have to send it off somewhere else. And at the moment, taking it to a supermarket and those places that you have reduces a lot of contamination and that sort of thing. And they can afford to take it away to specific recycling plants. But yeah, so I think we're going to need to know what the legislation is before we adapt to that, because it could have either no impact on our service or a profound impact on our service. We're just not quite sure what is going to happen yet.
So on that basis, is that something that you'll want to come back to us with once you've got the answer to the question from central government?
Yeah, once we know what's happening, if we have to make any amendments in that space, absolutely, we could bring it back here and have a discussion about it. I think that would be fine.
Thank you. The second part of the question, apologies, Chair, if it's the wrong timing, but given we know the problems, I think Councillor Irons referred to some of them, of the interface between different services, particularly, it happens in the rail industry, it happens in all sorts of industries where we've got multiple parties who want to put the blame on someone else. To what extent has the potential arguing between different sides of the service been taken into account in the costings or otherwise of the proposal?
I think it has had, as I said before, when we've thought of examples of other councils that have done multiple arm's lengths and got into those kind of disputes you were talking about. I think the good thing about this model is when it's an in-house service, it's not a contractor going, well, I'm not contracted to do that. It's either you sweep, you don't sweep, and we can make sure that things are swept. We can be very robust in our spec to the waste collectors, though, because we don't want them just to go, well, we're just going to leave rubbish all over the streets then because someone else is going to do it. We will have to be, when we're talking about that client monitoring team, when we're talking about those inspections, they'll have to be following the trucks to monitor what's coming off the back of them and what's left behind. And we're going to have to shape our client monitoring team to manage that relationship between both sides. And that's the kind of work we'll be doing over the next 18 months.
So are we calculating for extra resource to go into our monitoring team, given that interface that needs to be managed?
Well, we'll be, there would have to be some kind of divisional look at the division and look at where the resources are. We're in the process of getting a new director, and he'll have some views on what needs to happen with the structure of the team. But of course, we're going to have to structure our resources to respond to that need. But I think we're in a much better place now than we were a few years ago, because the foundations are there now.
I think Officer Zeb, John.
Yeah, thank you. If I could add to that, working in reverse from a director's perspective, a divisional perspective, we are reviewing, what is the correct setup in the future. So that's some interesting work that's going on between the two parties. We have some developing ideas in terms of partnering governance So we'll have formal meetings on a monthly basis between the two parties that is coordinated by the contract management team. So we'll have the two parties governed by the contract management team to make sure that there is effective dialogue. And that needs to be a monthly minute meeting on a proactive basis. And then from stepping back from that, we will be developing with the specification on both sides what those requirements are, where we have had issue or conflict in those interfaces to ensure that we have those nuanced things detailed. Because then we say, well, that's what it said. Look, I have a book and it says, you know, this is a responsible party and this is what we need to monitor. So for example, a commission service ideas in our head, we would be looking at a service provider providing our client team a standardization in terms of self-monitoring, where they record imagery and they provide that in a monthly report to show us that they have an effective team out monitoring post-collection. Because in our resident survey, one of the main issues from a collection perspective, they don't put our boxes back. So how do we tackle that? So we'll build something nuanced in the specifications that says thou shall make sure that you put boxes back, and also have an evidence-based process to demonstrate to us that you're monitoring that. And therefore we'll set a system in. And we just need to go through that nuanced aspect line by line by line to make sure we have that rigorous background. So it won't be an outcome-based specification. I think that's important. It isn't a general, let's just keep things clean to this standard. We have a hybrid specification, which is it needs to be clean to this standard, or bins need to be collected at this frequency. Also, the minimum requirements are these. So you shall need to do this, you shall need to do that. So that's what we call hybrid model. So we don't stymie innovation by anybody, but we do have minimum requirements. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. So I'm just conscious that we've been asking a lot of questions to officers and to cabinet members. So I'm going to take the moment now just to have a quick short break, just for 10 minutes. So we'll then come back and continue where we left off with the discussion and then move on to recommendations afterwards. So let's take a quick break. So I've got it now as just before past, so we'll come back just before 22. Thanks so much.